If you've been paying attention to the last couple videos, you've probably noticed my brother and I mentioning spiders everywhere, and he's quite a bit arachnophobic. But I'm telling you, I'll just clear stuff off and think that's the end of it. The next day I come in and there are spiders just making little homes all over my shop. I've never had spiders like this before. Anyway, maybe if you know what to do about getting rid of some spiders, post something in the comments. Hey, this is Nate with BleepinJeep. Today we have a whole bunch of plumbing to do. Got oil cooler lines, coolant lines, all kinds of stuff. And to answer some of your call to action, I've been adding some lights to make the videos a little bit brighter. So bear with me as I slowly finish the shop. I'd like to start by mounting these fans. Now, for the most part, the bulk of our work is going to be plumbing. Fuel system, cooling system, all that stuff. But the reason I'm starting here is I need to build brackets to mount this to the back of the radiator, and I'd kind of like to use those brackets as an attachment point for some of this plumbing that I'm going to have going across here. So let's get started. I'm going to make this bracket out of the same material type you'll notice that I make most of my brackets out of, and that is aluminum. I like aluminum because it's easy to work with and it doesn't rust, so there's no need to paint it. So what I'm looking at here is you've got these little slots cut out on the top and bottom of this fan. So I think what I'm going to do is just build a bracket that's just kind of slightly taller than what we need. Looks like if I go like 1.25 inches or so, that's probably all we're going to need. And then I'm going to go 28 wide because that's what the width of the mount for the radiator is. And then basically just drill some holes through our new brackets and then mount it on. It's going to be real easy. Well, I installed our really basic brackets that we made for this fan shroud. On the bottom, I decided to invert the bolts in order to make it the right cush clamps, because I'm going to have, oil cooler lines, and I'm going to have heater hose and radiator hose and stuff that I'm going to be routing across the bottom, and I'd like to be able to get it to where it's anchored down nice and tight. So the lower radiator hose is going to be a combination of a couple of universal hoses with a coupling. But I checked and this all measures out and it looks like it should fit for what we need. I'm not a big fan of the look of these, but they don't make like a special conversion hose for what we're putting together. Anyway, let's get this mounted. Got our fans in, everything's mounted, seems like it's pretty nice and solid. Now I'm going to go ahead and start routing the rest of our cooling system. So I'm going to get the rest of these hoses hooked up and then start hooking up the heater hoses. Ooh. Start hooking up the heater hoses to our heater box. So just continuing on our mission to get all the plumbing done. Got all the fittings together to plumb our oil system for our cooler and our filter. So I'm going to take the grill off of the Jeep, and then I'm going to figure out a way to mount this cooler behind the grill. You can see at the bottom here I have a probe that's going to be for our oil pressure, and then we need to figure out a place to remote mount our filter. I'd like to mount it on the frame down low, high enough to keep the filter itself out of harm's way, but low enough that whenever you unscrew it and oil drips out of it, it doesn't just coat your engine bay. So obviously I don't want to put it high in the fender or anything like that. Then out of the top of our oil filter, we have this little 3/8 line, and this is going to deliver filtered and cooled oil back into our turbo. So let's get started. Well, this thing's pretty tweaked. Got a nice wide gap here. Really shallow gap here. Somehow this whole thing got tweaked and messed around. I know this front grille is definitely not from this truck. This is like a 70s and older, and the truck is an 82, so somewhere along the way somebody messed this up. Anyway, we are going to mount our oil cooler right here. We're going to take advantage of this big gap so we can fit our fittings down in there. And I'll just make some really simple brackets to mount this to the front of the grill. Use a small chunk of scrap that we had from building our oil pan and just meet it up with this hole that's on the side of this cooler. And we'll just drill another one and bolt it in. That should work. Simple. I like it. Now just drill a couple of holes and route some lines. If you've never seen a fitting like this, this is not a traditional barb fitting. This actually is like, it's a fitting where once you push this hose on there, it will not come back off. It locks it in there permanently. So I will usually heat the ends of these hoses up to make it a little easier so you can just kind of try to push it all on in one shot. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to pre-press these both sides of the line in here first before I mount the cooler, because it is kind of difficult to get them on there. There's a few pluses and minuses to this kind of fitting. The pluses are it's really simple, it's really fast, and it doesn't leak. They're great. But the cons are, if you need to pull it off, you got to cut it off. There's no loosening up a hose clamp and then reconfiguring some stuff. It's pretty much a one-shot deal. But the line's really inexpensive, the fittings are relatively inexpensive, so I like to use these on a number of different applications, and this is one of them. Starting to get these oil lines routed. So I'm connected to the engine. I'm routing everything through the cooler. Got my return and everything routed down here. And right now I'm figuring out where I'm going to put my oil filter. So I'm kind of liking up here on the fender. Before I was wanting to get down on the frame, but it's a little too low. So I think what I'm going to do is screw it into the fender right here and then finish routing the rest of these lines. Getting ready to connect our last oil line. I've got everything cut and ready to get pressed on. This is the return. Now I've got a pretty big system outside of the engine now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill this return up. I'm going to put a funnel down the end of it. And I'm going to fill this return up with oil. Try to get as much oil as I can in there. And then I'm going to take the filter off and fill it full of oil as well. Because when I initially start this up, it's going to have to fill this cooler, it's going to have to fill all these lines, and there's going to be a little bit of starvation. So in order to combat that, I'm going to try to put as much in the system ahead of time as I can to make sure I get ahead of any kind of wear. One last oil connection. Here to here, nice and short. All right, see my nice zip tie job? Yeah, I tried to keep it clean. So, as unprofessional as zip ties are, I do think that you can make them look okay if you take your time on them. So, what I usually do to make it look to where it's not completely crappy when you use zip ties everywhere is I'll do even spacing, and then I'll take and I'll turn these little guys to where they're out of sight, and I think that it looks a lot better. I mean, for as low budget as we can keep it, and we want it to look as good as we can, I guess. So at least things look organized. We don't have just hoses going all over the place. I don't know if I showed this in the last video, but we were resting right on the oil pan to this diff before, and after we modified the pan, we've got just enough clearance. So obviously, I could drive down a nice flat road with it like this probably, but you definitely couldn't go off-road or you'd start hitting the pan. Cool thing is we're going to put a 3-inch lift kit on this, and so if you add 3 inches to where we're at now, I think we're going to be just fine. We'd have to like jump it basically in order to get that diff to hit the pan. I don't plan on jumping this truck too much, but I guess we'll see. Next on the agenda for plumbing would be hooking up our fuel lines. So this is the return line from the engine 4. What I'm planning on doing is just cutting this shorter, and then this is the fuel line from the OM617, the return, and so I'm just going to cut that steel one and plug this in. It's the same size. I'm going to run soft line for the feed from the tank all the way up here. So I decided to flare the line. If you've never done this before, you got to get the right size line on there, and on the front of these it'll show you the different sizes, and this line happens to be 1/4 inch. So you take this little tool that comes in the kit. It's got these little tools for the different size lines. You clamp it down with the 1/4 inch hole. You take the shoulder, and that's the depth that you use against your line. So see how I set that next to it? That's how much line you want going past this adapter. Then you put the other side, the pointy side, into your metal line. If I can do this one-handed, let's see. The other hand's holding the camera. So now it's just kind of spinning free on there. I'm going to take this bad boy, and this is going to push that down, and it's going to squish the line. It's called an anvil, I guess. So you take the anvil, you squish the line down into that, whatever that big thing's called. And then once you pull that adapter out, then you run just the anvil down into it, and that's how you get your double flare. Yay, finished product! Now I should be able to fit this line over it, and once we cinch down our hose clamp, it shouldn't go anywhere. Got the return all connected. Everything seems nice and tight. Should be good to go. So now we need to connect to this feed. Can we get the camera in there? I think we can. Focus. So this is the feed. This is a primer that you pump to prime the air and everything through it. And then this is that weird little pre-filter. Looks like something you put on your lawnmower, but this is a Mercedes part. This is a weird little pre-filter. So we're going to stick the pre-filter down in there, and then we're going to plug that soft line into the back side of this and then route it back to the tank. Pretty straightforward. So the next thing on our plumbing list would be our vacuum pump. We need to connect the vacuum pump to our brake booster. So for the Mercedes lines on the vacuum pump, everything's like this really hard plastic or it's hard metal. And I figured this metal's probably going to get in the way when I try to set up the aftermarket, well, not aftermarket. I'm trying to convert the power steering pump that came with the Jeep to fit on this motor. That way I can use factory lines and whatnot going to the box. So I figured it'd be easier to eliminate this hard line. So I unthreaded some of these joints here, and I was able to determine that this is the same size that goes in there. So I'm getting rid of this hard line altogether, so it'll just kind of go to this, like, it's definitely softer than steel, but harder than, you know, flexible rubber, but it's kind of like a stiff plastic line. So I think what the strategy now is to thread this plastic line direct to our injection pump, which I'm doing right now. And then I can bend it a little bit here or there where I need it. And then I cut away this hard plastic line on the check valve. Make sure we can focus on it. There we go. So this comes off. Now, this is really similar in size to what comes off of the factory brake booster. Now this is a check valve and this is a check valve. We don't need two, but we're going to use two because they're both going to be operating in the same way. So it doesn't hurt anything to have two check valves, but I can use this check valve basically as a coupling going from this hard line to this soft line. So I'm going to use my heat guns so I can get this hot enough to press on here, and then I'll use some hose clamps, and I don't see any reason why this wouldn't work. So this will kind of be a nice way to figure out our vacuum system without spending any money. There's one vacuum line that's very important to us, and that is the vacuum line going from the intake manifold over to the injection pump. And so I just ran that line and kind of secured it to our injection lines and whatnot. And what that does is it enriches the amount of fuel that the engine is delivering based on the amount of boost that it sees. So it enriches the fuel as the boost goes up. So this is the supply side that goes over to the passenger side of the vehicle. We're going to disconnect the hard line, and we're just going to run soft line from the tank all the way to the engine. This hard line for the return, we're just going to leave out of convenience. It'll be real easy. We can just cut it where it's at the engine, and then we can take and just connect it from the return, the soft line on the return, right to the hard line. It'll be real easy. So we also need to drop the tank because I'm going to be doing a lift kit, and one of these bolts here in the back. All right, let's see if we can focus in the dark here. So this front spring hanger, the inside of the bolt is right next to the tank. This is a C channel, so it's not boxed. The bolt's on the other side of this C channel. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to drop the tank. That way I can do the lift kit with the tank out. Then when I put the tank back in, I'll just run I'll finish connecting the soft line from our fuel tank. It'll give me an opportunity to maybe open the tank up and see if it's clean in there as well. Just got done running our fuel line. So it goes front all the way back. I coiled it up right here. I put a little bit of tape on the end to make sure to get anything in there. And now I'm ready to drop our fuel tank. Let's see, we've got, ooh, hard to see. There's 4 bolts. There's 2 on each side. I already went through and sprayed a little bit of rust penetrator on them. Well, this is a first for me. This tank was really heavy, and I thought it was empty. The owner told me it was empty when I bought the truck, and I even popped the fuel cap, and it didn't smell like fuel at all. I was like, that's interesting. Well, this is completely full of water. Like just water. And if you look real close, there's damage all over this tank. There's repair spots everywhere. I mean, this is what you see when you buy a truck for $500, I guess. But wasn't expecting that. I think the owner wasn't exactly honest about what types of issues he was having with this truck. He said, "Oh, it was running great. I just have a loose wire somewhere." That's what I was told. Anyhow, I'm not too worried about it. I'll just have to locate another tank, or I guess I could make one. I really don't particularly want to make one, but we'll just have to see. I guess it depends on how difficult it is to locate another one of these. Well, that's it for today. Got a lot done. Pretty proud of how far we went with all of our plumbing and everything else. It looks like we're getting pretty close. You know, of course, I've got some little things that I'm gonna have to button up here or there. Some unexpected leaky issues with our thermostat, and then of course the very unexpected leaky fuel tank, completely full H2O. But that's okay. This is just the kind of stuff you run into whenever you buy cheap non-running vehicles and then try to swap whatever engine you want to into them. So if you like what you see, you want to see more, click like or subscribe, support us on Patreon, and follow us on social media. Thank you.